What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and Aquaman humbles Superman. It's amazing. So, this is technically the beginning of the second story arc. The first story arc, which we can cover, is really good. It's really cool. It's like 8 issues long. It is pretty chunky, but this one kicks off with Superman literally possessed, facing off against the rest of the Justice League. Now, what ends up going on here is he starts spouting off all these crazy things, right? You know, the Man of Steel is mine, and so obviously it's not Superman acting here per se. Of course, Wonder Woman chimes in. Whatever that was that went into Superman has control of his body. We have to get it before it's too late. Of course, Superman responds and he says, I've been hidden in the mantle, but now it has changed. So much has changed. Make way for the end. So it's like this kind of back and forth thing, right? Now, of course, Batman, I wouldn't say is prepared for something like this, but he at least has an idea of how to deal with it. Because at that point, he tells Wonder Woman, right, I'll distract him while you try to pin him down. Of course, Wonder Woman hits him with the lasso of truth and is like, fight it, Superman, right? You have to fight this thing. Now, what's really interesting about all of this is I've seen tale on social media, people kind of asking the question, if you take Superman out of the picture, is Wonder Woman the strongest person in the world? No, right? Not by a mile. In fact, the strongest character on Earth is the one character Superman is afraid to fight, and that's actually Martian Manhunter. That was from Grant Morrison's JLA back in 1998, and I think it was like issue 86 or something like that. But there's a point where Superman's like, Martian Manhunter's at the top of the list. I would never want to fight that guy in an open fight. He would beat the hell out of me. Right? So it's not Wonder Woman, but it is still cool to see here because Superman in this moment literally pulls the lasso of truth off of himself and then just starts cold cocking people. And so at that point, he just literally addresses the entirety of the league, freezing the ground under everybody. And it's just like, I can hear him, you know, screaming in the back of his soul, telling me to stop, but you cannot stop me. And he says, nothing on this earth can stop me. And where he goes to like drop the killing blow on Batman, which is completely believable, unlike Batman being able to beat Superman, that Aquaman shows up on the scene and grabs Superman's arm. Now, the crazy thing is that in that moment, Superman turns to him and he's like, unhand me, and just like punches Aquaman as hard as he can. And Aquaman's like, man, son, you better come strong, right? Like, if that's really the best you got, right? Like, he just no-sells a punch from Superman. And he's just like, now, Superman, that's not how we treat friends. And just immediately cracks this guy and just sends Superman flying. And at that point, Wonder Woman's just like, Arthur? And Batman's like, he's back. Changed by magic, maybe. The way he took that punch, that's kind of nuts. And that's where Zan chimes in, and it's just like, probably, right? Arthur's channeling something called the Blue. Arion says he's a god now. Okay, so let's provide some context here, because I wanted to wait until this moment to do it. So, the return of Zan, one of the Wonder Twins, that happened in the first 8 issues. When he makes contact with his sister, historically, he's able to take on the form of water and then do all kinds of crazy water-based stuff and even magical stuff in the form of water. The guy Arion that he's talking about was introduced in Jeremy Adams' first 8 issues of Aquaman, and he's basically a guy that has the ability to manipulate magic. He's a sorcerer of sorts. Not nearly as powerful as someone like Zatanna, but he's very powerful in his own right. As far as the Blue goes, this is a lot more interesting. So in the first 8 issues, Aquaman was transferred to a place called the Blue, quite literally traveled to that location after Atlantis was attacked, and seemingly everybody within it had vanished. And so his idea was, they've been taken to this otherworldly dimension. And in fact, the gateway to get into the Blue was a giant Omega symbol, because in effect, the first 8 issues of Jeremy Adams' Aquaman run directly starts to segue into DCKO and Darkseid using all that magic and power to basically corrupt time across the universe. But the idea behind the Blue, and we'll talk more about this if you guys want me to cover the first 8 issues, because like I said, it's really good. The idea behind the Blue is that it was introduced in Mark Millar's run of Swamp Thing back in the mid-1990s. The idea behind it was that in the same way that Swamp Thing represents the green and the Parliament of Trees, that the Blue was introduced initially as what was called the Clear, that there was like a Parliament of Waves and different things like that. Jeremy Adams has basically repurposed this, called it the Blue, and then now says that it's basically a source of energy that exists out there, right? One of the fundamental forces of all creation. And in fact, everything that exists because of the Blue. It's quite literally a source of life. Without it, nothing would live at all. And so while Jeremy Adams hadn't really put a finger on it per se, in effect, Aquaman is now powered by the force of creation. So he is astronomically powerful, and he's still figuring out how his powers work. So we haven't even seen the full totality of what he can do. So back to this moment here. With Zan showing back up, of course, his sister Jaina just calls his name, and then of course he ends up, taking off because he finally gets to be with his sister again. He'd been missing for quite some time, and so now that he's finally back, he's kind of learning what all's been happening in the time he's been gone. The other part of this is that Aquaman, in the face of Superman, calls on what he refers to as his blue warriors. One of these is his daughter, who's basically aged up. There's, of course, Titanus, who's basically the comedic relief, but he's hilarious in his own way. There's a Lady of the Lake. There's Lori, who back in the days in Superman 129, original Superman 129 from the original Superman comic in 1940, she was introduced as a love interest of Clark Kent when he was in college, and then once he found Lois, Lori kind of got kicked to the wayside. She's a mermaid, and she resurfaced, right, during the last 8 issues from Jeremy Adams' run. A lot happened in that run, man. A lot happened in that story arc, but it's so good. God, it's so freaking good. The best Aquaman has been in years. But essentially, it's Justice League Blue. Right, if we're being honest, it's like the Justice League of the Oceans, which is one of the coolest things, right? It's one of the dopest ideas, because Superman is quite literally attacking everyone. And so when that happens, Zon kind of joins back in with the rest of Justice League Blue, and then they go to subdue Superman. And for the most part, they're successful in doing so. And in fact, a lot of this comes by way of Arian basically purging the spirit of Superman. Now, there is a lot that's going on here. And in fact, we'll kind of find out what that is as we get through further to this, because he has been possessed, but it's more that he was possessed by the actions of a person, as opposed to any kind of nefarious spirit or anything like that. Technically, it's nefarious, but essentially an exorcism takes place, right? Superman's cured, and then it's just kind of what happened? And at that point, Zan's just right, it looks like you were possessed by kind of some spirit demon. Glad we showed up when we did. Aquaman knew exactly where to go, like an underwater hound dog. And that's when Superman realizes Lori's there. And of course, while there are no romantic feelings between the two of them anymore, at least not on his behalf, it's Superman, right? Name one woman on the surface of the earth who isn't down bad for Superman, right? It's Superman, right? Every woman probably wants to get with that guy. Superman's just kind of look, it's kind of cool to see you, right? But for the most part, it's kind of figuring out what's going on, or at least understanding that Superman isn't really possessed anymore. And so following all of that, because Aquaman had kind of been removed from the Justice League for quite some time, he ends up going back to the Justice League Watchtower and kind of conversing with everybody that's going on. And that's where he spills the beans on a lot of the things that had happened, which, spoiler alert, for the first 8 issues, Mera dies. Mera's dead. It's crazy. Basically, they were time displaced. They ended up aging up, all kinds of crazy stuff. But she's old and gone. Literally, Aquaman watches her die. And that's why Wonder Woman is just kind of Mera was an incredible hero, right? An incredible woman. And so what ends up happening is Superman's just kind of I can't imagine how hard that must be. And Aquaman's I can hardly imagine it myself, right? All I can do is try and focus on the here and now, focus on my daughter, and focus on the oceans. And that's where Batman's yes, right, your daughter. She and the others wanted to stay on Earth rather than the Watchtower, right? Do they simply not trust us? And that's where Aquaman's I can see your wheels turning, Batman. You don't trust anybody. You're suspicious of anybody. So, of course, people who show back up to me from some other dimension that don't want to come up here to the Watchtower, from your perspective, it seems a little suspicious. But he's the reality is that after all they've been through, they don't really trust anybody, right? They will not be your Justice League Blue, if that's what you're thinking. They're not going to be your Justice League team. They kind of are, but they're not going to be working directly for the Justice League itself. In that instance, it's really more that they're working alongside Aquaman, because one of the big things to know about Arthur Curry in DC Comics is that he's always been a member of the League, but always been apart or separate at the same time. You know what I mean? He's there, but he's not there. He's kind of like Doctor Strange in Marvel Comics, right? Technically, he's part of the Avengers or whatever superhero team may need him, but he's usually always over there, right, doing his own thing. And Arthur's much the same way. And so Wonder Woman asks, right, these new powers, you took Superman's punch as if it was nothing. And that's where Arthur's just it's kind of hard to explain, right? I've become something else. The power of an infinite number of oceans flows through me. And so Batman's just we should run some tests. And Arthur's just no tests, right? None of that stuff. I will figure out how all this works on my own. And so the question that they kind of ask is Bruce is right. We don't know what this is, right? We don't know what your new powers could mean. And Arthur just says, right, what it means is I can protect the ocean, truly protect the ocean. I can feel hurricanes before they happen, hear the cries of someone screaming leagues away. It's good to see you, my friends, but I need to be down there with my friends and with my daughter. Now, it's very easy to kind of skim over what Aquaman is saying here, but I mean, if you look at it for what it is, this power boost he has makes him like an oceanic version of Superman, because Superman can hear what happens on the other side of the world. He can detect changes in weather patterns and kind of understand or know when like some event is about to transpire. It's one of these really cool elements of Aquaman's power boost here. He's becoming immensely capable. And so he just tells the League, right, if you need me, you know where to find me. And so at that point, he ends up going to his quarters within the Watchtower, which kind of has everything that he would need if he were at home in Atlantis whenever he's actually here in the Watchtower away from home. And he kind of thinks about the idea of like having to start over, right? Because one of the things to keep in mind is that, well, I guess we got to spoil that shit again. In the first 8 issues, all the Atlanteans die. It wasn't just Mera. And so the crazy thing here is that with him losing everything he knows and loves, everything he cares about, there's this point where like all these alarms are going off in the Watchtower. And like Ted Kord's just like something just leapt out of the Watchtower towards Earth. And he's like, are you kidding me? Because Aquaman just jumped from space down to Earth and was probably one of the dopest things I have ever seen, performing what may very well be the greatest dive in the history of the human race, and just arrives back in the ocean. But can we just take a moment to soak in the fact that Aquaman just dove from space down to Earth with the greatest of ease? Let's just kind of soak that in, because it's dope. But he ends up traveling back to Atlantis proper, and when he gets there, the entire place is derelict, right? It's destroyed. It's in a state of disarray, just like it was when he left it and traveled to the blue in search of all the Atlanteans who had disappeared. Here's the crazy thing. They're not gone. They're trapped in there, right? Mera's there, his daughter as a baby is there, Garth is there, all the Atlanteans are there. The place is fine. It's completely and totally fine. He just doesn't think it is. And that's the crazy thing here, is because in that moment, the question kind of has to be asked, what in the world is going on here? Because what you end up doing is you pick up with Aquaman's daughter, who basically travels to like this unexplored place of the ocean. And she says that the ocean is a mystery, the last unexplored portion of this planet, its surface untamed, its depths unknown. But for those that would venture forth at great risk and peril, the dark waters might share their mysteries and bring to you great treasure. And so at that point, you jump back to Garth and the other Atlanteans. And Garth is literally using magic to try to bring down this barrier here, right? And that's one of the things where he kind of explains, right? He's like, I can't do it, right? It's impossible. This magic is all knots and chaos, though I have been able to see what it does, keeping us dimensionally shifted here, but not here. Anyone that comes to Atlantis will see nothing but derelict buildings and drifting seaweed, while we are stuck inside with no way to escape, barred from the ocean forever. And so that's where Mera is just kind of like, Zebel, right? And like people are like, what are you talking about? Now, technically, she's from Zebel. She was raised to hate Atlanteans. And in fact, she tried to kill Arthur Curry. Of course, they ended up getting married because, I don't know, opposites attract. No, there is a whole story there, right? But the fact is, when no one really understands what she's talking about, she says, this magic, you say it's designed to keep us dimensionally shifted here on Earth. And that's where Garth is like, yeah. And she's like, then send me somewhere that is Earth, but not Earth. Send me to Zebel, a pocket dimension within Earth itself. And that's where Garth is like, a loophole. Okay, that might work, but if I can make a doorway, send me and Jackson. And that's where Mera's like, no, right? It is my home, my people. From there, I can find a way to Earth, to Arthur, and find a way to free us from whatever this is. Can you do it? And Garth is like, I mean, I can certainly try. And so what you do is you switch back to Arthur. And this is where you kind of start to get this idea of exactly what he's capable of. Because there's this point where he's just kind of sitting out there, right? Just kind of observing or feeling the ocean, right? Feeling all the water. And as he's doing that, he's literally hearing everything that's happening across the ocean. That Captain Nemo, who was locked in the blue, had also joined them, showing up into the main DC universe after their escape, that they're talking about, traveling to some other place, and he's like, I pray that it's someplace green. There's a voice out there, Billy, don't wade out too far. There's another one, just throw the coin in the pond, and your wish will come true. So any form of water, he has control over. Now, this is also built on top of what had happened at the end of Absolute Power, where Aquaman also developed hydrokinesis. So he has complete and total control over every form of water that exists out there, right? But he ends up picking up on what's basically an attack, right, out there in the ocean somewhere. And as a protector of the oceans, he ends up responding, only to find that there's a bunch of undead pirates who are going after like a tanker. Now, it's not really a battleship, so it's not really like armed to the teeth or anything like that. And so with a bunch of undead pirates, they don't quite know what to make of this situation. And so what ends up happening is that Arthur and basically Justice League Blue end up responding. And they're all still kind of flabbergasted by the fact that he was able to hear this from the other side of the world. And so that's where he's like, these guys made quite a ruckus. And Arion's like, what's a ruckus, right? And it's like, well, a ruckus is what they made. And so that's why we're here now. So it's kind of cool, right? Because the League shows up and they hold their own against all these pirates. They're undead pirates. They don't really feel all that spectacular in the first place, but they are on some kind of a mission. Now, that's where Aquaman and them are just kind of like, what are you around for, right? We don't know who you are. We don't know where you came from. Your goal is to clearly accomplish something. You're not just sailing the seven seas, right, for all eternity like Barbossa and his crew, that instead, there's got to be something going on here. And so that's where Arion literally attacks these guys, and it's just like, there is magic here, right? It feels ancient, and it feels like dark magic. Someone reanimated these guys. Someone brought them back from the dead. And so that's where they're able to use magic to essentially take out the pirates. The problem is you're just talking about a really, really old ship. And at the end of the day, no one really knows how to pilot it. And so what ends up going on here is that in order to defeat or take all these pirates out, what they have to do is basically create what's called a ghost trap. So quite literally, something out of Ghostbusters, which they successfully do, right? They lure all the pirates into one location, at least Aquaman does, by just kind of inciting them, angering them, so on and so forth. And then Arion literally just fires off this giant magical spell that essentially takes the pirates out, right? Sends them back from where they came from. The issue with this is that this ship is flying headlong to the surface, which is exactly what happens. It just like crash lands into this city, which is dope. You have these kids, right, where one of them's just like, why would you dress as a pirate, right? Pirates are stupid, right? It's, you should be dressing like Green Lantern, or something like that. But then like when this pirate ship just crash lands in the city, they're like, okay, cool. Pirates are dope, which they are. Pirates are amazing, right? But the fact is, you still have a couple who are left. They all kind of get taken out, by Aquaman and these guys. There really isn't a whole lot doing there. But that's where things get kind of wonky, because in the middle of this, some of these pirates that remain are just kind of digging up treasure. And one of them says, right, there it is, my bauble. With this, we can be alive and so much more. And that's where Arthur's daughter shows up and says, no, I don't think so. Not for you, at least. And then they address her directly and they say, you did this. You brought us back to lead you here, to get my treasure. You cannot have it. And she's like, oh, but I can, and I absolutely will. And so she just says, now it's time for you to go back to sleep, and literally shuts the pirates down using magic. They're all basically destroyed, right? Those who remain, including the captain. She ends up grabbing this chest and ultimately taking off with it. And the question that Arthur and them are kind of left with is like, what were these guys doing and what were they hunting for? And so with his daughter kind of taken off and basically hiding, they don't really have any answers here. And so what ends up happening is the answer to that question doesn't really come directly. Instead, you kind of focus for a moment on Mera and Garth and them basically opening up a portal and then getting Mera to the realm of Zebul so she can travel from there into Earth proper and then go to find Aquaman. But the rest of the story actually shifts away from that larger event involving Arthur's daughter and actually focuses on what's going on with DCKO, because this part that we're talking about here takes place just before DCKO number 1, which is to say, when all the members of the Justice League are brought together and they're all informed that a tournament's going to be held to determine who it is that's going to wield the Omega Force within Earth, and then basically challenge Darkseid, who now is created and controls the absolute universe. And so in the midst of all of this, what ends up happening is like all these parademons, right, just kind of start appearing out of nowhere and basically attacking all these people on one of the Mr. Terrific cruise ships, because yes, Mr. Terrific owns a cruise cruise line. And I gotta be honest, man, I would go on it. And I mean, we gotta say it. The cruise line is probably terrific. But tish. But the fact is, right, like these parademons, and kind of filling you guys in, for those of you guys who don't necessarily know what's going on with this portion or have not been following DCKO, the long and short of it is that what Darkseid had done at some point prior to creating the absolute universe is he had transformed the core of Earth, quite literally left the core of Earth in such a way that it's essentially becoming a new apocalypse. The larger theme of Darkseid as it stands right now, and essentially his motivation, is that when he was destroyed by the Justice League, or at least believed to be destroyed, he traveled to an alternate universe, reformed and restructured that universe, turned it into the absolute universe with the intention of leading that army to the main DC universe to destroy all the superheroes. And because Earth would have been converted to a new version of Apocalypse by then, he will have successfully finally conquered Earth and then turned the world into a new apocalypse, which he would rule from, right? So it's kind of just achieving an ultimate goal. A fairly simple plot, but the way in which it's happening is phenomenal. It's amazing. And so that's why all these parademons are popping up here. Now, it is important to keep in mind that because of the fact that Aquaman and Justice League Blue have been so removed from everything that's been happening involving Superman and Batman and all that stuff, they don't necessarily know. And that's one of the things to keep in mind, is that at the time this story is coming out, Superman is in the absolute universe with Superboy Prime dealing with the absolute Legion of Doom. Batman's got his whole thing going on in the Batman comics, right, within, Gotham, right, the Matt Fraction run, essentially. Wonder Woman's doing her whole thing, right? Everybody's kind of separate in some way or another. But I simply say all that to say, in so many ways, it's one of these situations where all these pieces are kind of being held by all these different superheroes. They're kind of fractured and scattered all over the place, and it was only really at the beginning of DCKO #1 that all those pieces were finally brought together by Time Trapper Doomsday and all that kind of stuff. And so, again, kind of focusing on this, I felt like a little bit of context there was important. Focusing on the here and now, it's largely just Justice League Blue, right? Dealing with parademons and trying to defeat these parademons, which for the most part they're able to do. A lot of the members of Justice League Blue have never encountered parademons. They don't necessarily know what they are, but because of the fact that the parademons are a credible threat and the members of Justice League Blue are incredibly capable in their own way, they just take them out the way you would expect them to take villains out. So it's not really super spectacular or anything like that. The bigger question of Aquaman in knowing what parademons are is that they have to be coming from somewhere. Parademons always signal the arrival and invasion of either Darkseid or one of Darkseid's generals, right? Desaad, Steppenwolf, potentially Granny Goodness, although she usually appears with the female Furies. But the fact is, right, they have to be coming from a place, some location. And so as they're traveling through this ocean, they start to realize that there's a segment of it that is starting to get warmer as they get closer to it. And Aquaman says, these tunnels lead farther into the Earth's core. Around us are lava flows, shielded by the rock, heating the water as we move farther in. And that's where they're like, we can hear something in the next cave. There's a sound coming from there. And so once they finally get there, Aquaman starts to realize what's going on, and he realizes the Deep Six are here. Now, initially, a lot of the members of the Justice League Blue don't know what the Deep Six is, and so he just says, abominations, right? Creatures created by Darkseid, but what are they doing here, right? It looks like they're building something. The steam, the rock, and that's when he realizes it's a furnace. And that's one of the things that's been happening as part of the DCKO event and the events leading up to it, especially during Justice League Unlimited. That what had been happening was that with the Earth being transformed into a new version of Apocalypse, as most of you guys probably know, if for no other reason than your own searches on the internet, Apocalypse has gigantic furnaces. And it's one of the things Aquaman hits on here, right? On Apocalypse, the planet that they are from, giant volcanic furnaces dot the surface, a blight that makes living there almost impossible. They must be trying to make one here, a volcanic furnace that will decimate not just sea life, but anyone within hundreds of miles on the surface. Now, what Aquaman and them don't know is this is not the only one, that there are multiple furnaces like this being established around the world. And so, of course, they launch an attack against all these parademons, and they basically take them out pretty quickly and quite readily. But what's so interesting about this is that that when it comes to parademons, it's always a war of attrition. When parademons come after you, it's not just like a gigantic parademon that's like really, really strong and just attacks the entire group. No. They come at you with just overwhelming force. So when the Justice League face off against parademons, it's not one demon for each member of the League. It's thousands of parademons, all attacking at one time and just overwhelming as fast as possible. And that's what starts to happen. That where Justice League Blue is initially able to hold their own, that goes away like that. And they are overwhelmed so incredibly fast. And so at that point, Aquaman starts channeling the power of the blue again. And he says, do you want to feel the power of the ocean? Do you want to see what happens when you try and hurt this world? I am Arthur, the avatar of the blue, and you will pay. Because at that point, he channels the entirety of the blue and he says, I am still getting used to this, letting the power flow through me, being one with the water, telling it what to do, how to behave, commanding it to attack, hot from the earth's core, deadly flaming vipers at my command, the tool of my revenge, the means of their destruction, now to use the water to cool the lava, create jagged crags and sharpened rock, a typhoon of death, and literally destroys every single parademon. And honestly, man, the way he looks when he's just like standing there with his trident surrounded by rocks and stuff, man, this guy looks like Ocean Jesus. He looks amazing. Like, it's really dope. But here's the crazy thing, is that where he lashes out and he destroys every single parademon, his daughter's initially like, that was impressive, father, right? That was very impressive. And Aquaman's just kind of like, it was what needed to be done. Now, there is a subtlety here. Jeremy Adams is giving us a pretty notable subtlety, which is that, if anything, that is probably not his daughter. Despite the fact that she claimed to be his daughter, and despite the fact that the age in which she's at right now is the proper age, given how time passed differently within the blue. But it's also kind of goading him into more and more extreme acts of violence. Because when he says it was what needed to be done, he kind of asks himself the question, right? Was it? There was something in the water, in you, Arthur, something out of control. And so that's where he just says, right, I have to talk to the Justice League and tell them what we found. And then we stop it any way we can. So this segues directly into Justice League Unlimited and the start of DC KO #1. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Let me know if you want me to cover the initial run from Jeremy Adams, because again, it's incredible. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, and I will catch you all later. Peace.